Wouldn't it be wonderful if we could teach the gullible to never be so comfortable with lies they eat like comfort food, to disregard the bogus claims and pseudoscientific claims? Can you imagine just how much indeed the world would change? No more political predators playing on the populace, but ilk plots to shift and kill metropolis. No more villains with the title in the Bible, holding phony temper Bibles like the stuff they teach is vital. Imagine it was normal to have to prove a claim you make, and folks really feel ashamed expressing content that was fake. It's not to say we never make mistakes, it's just to say we go out of our way to show the evidence it takes.
Remain skeptical while you travel the road of reason. Stay strapped with logic and fast. That's what it is, yo. Keep reality intact to help the truth grow. Question every claim, especially the ones you believe in. Remain skeptical while you travel the road of reason.
Hi, welcome to Road to Reason. I'm Rob Penzak.
And I'm David Tamayo, president and founder of Hispanic American Freethinkers. I got to put in that plug in every time. You know?
You got to put that in. So we're going to have a cool show today. We're going to be joined in about 15 minutes by Phil Torres. He's the author of The End, What Science and Religion Have to Tell Us About the Apocalypse. That's going to be a lot of fun. It's actually a fairly depressing topic, but he presents it with a really upbeat mood, so I think you're going to enjoy that. And it's really important stuff for us to cover.
I think we've spent a good couple of hours already amongst ourselves talking about this book and these topics. It's just so interesting. And we're not going to be able to cover everything, but definitely we will have some good stuff in there in that book.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to start off with a couple of announcements. You got one to start with?
Yeah, so Reason Rally. We have Reason Rally that is going to be here very soon. We've been talking about it for a long time. We had it in 2012. We had about 25,000 people that came in that time. We're expecting upwards of 50, 60,000 people to show up this time, maybe even more. The idea is to tell the politicians in Washington by showing up that reason is what they need to be doing there instead of this pandering to the right and pandering to religious groups and pandering to whoever's giving them money. The idea is to bring in party, have time, all these people. We're going to have some famous actors in there. We're going to have music. We're going to have all kinds of things. It's June the 4th is the main event, but the few days before and a few days after, there's no cost. You just have to show up, have a good time. There's all kinds of good stuff that's going to be going on in there. And you're going to get to meet a lot of good people, a lot of friends. You're going to come out with a lot of friends from there. Absolutely the best thing you can do this year. So I highly recommend it. You just have to get there and enjoy the fun. So,
and it really is important to turn out if you can. You know, one is that, as Dave Silverman points out in Fighting God quite a bit, atheism is not a fringe movement anymore. There are so many closeted atheists in various ways. If you're an agnostic and you sort of want to believe, you're actually still an atheist. If you don't have this belief in that personal God up there, if you redefine religion as well, Bernie Sanders did this, our secular person of the week last week, feels forced by politics to say, no, religion is very important to me. What does religion mean to me? That we all take care of one another. He came in between, pantheist and a humanist.
Exactly.
So, please do turn out. The other thing I'd mention about the secular community is, people at the top are wide open to making connections. So if you want to get involved and actually help the movement, this is something that both of us have seen here, just with the amount of people you can meet and actually get stuff done or organize events. We would love to get more involvement in this show and all throughout secularism. So come out to Reason Rally. It's going to be awesome.
Absolutely. Any time that you find someone that you like in the movement, it's a good time to come in. They're probably going to be there. I mean, there are going to be thousands and thousands of people, and probably everyone that you admire is probably going to be there, and then some new people that you haven't met yet. It's going to be a lot of fun. And yeah, there will be a few religious groups protesting us because they are not for reason, and that's okay. We welcome everybody.
All right, a couple other announcements. So I'm starting a program called Saved by Science in Richmond, Virginia, a couple hours from here. On February 14th, Dave Silverman is going to be down talking about Fighting God. On March 6th, Linda Lascola is going to be down with a couple of local people talking about Caught in the Pulpit, and also talking. Whoops. She's been in this
venue here. We've had her here in the show before, Linda.
Right.
Very good speaker. The book is super interesting. And I gathered that if they were to repeat those studies, they'd come up with even better and more people,
Yeah, well, she started with a small pilot study and discovered how much lack of belief there was in the clergy. So when we're talking about the clergy project, was the other part, and called in the pulpit, with somebody else that's actually coming out and going to be joining the clergy project. So it really should be a fascinating talk there. April 17th, Phil Torres, who you're about to meet in a few minutes, is going to be coming to Richmond. He's going to be joined by our guest from last week, Donald Prothero. Yeah. Their two books have a lot of synergy. Again, in some ways, this is really serious and depressing stuff that we're talking about, but it's important that we look at reality, because that's what's out there, and we address it head on, and we figure out what our real threats are and do our best to mitigate any potential damage instead of pretending it's not there.
That is always the question. A lot of people, do you want to know the truth, or do you want to be happy and be ignorant in bliss? And I don't know, personally, I like to know the truth regardless of whether it's going to make me happy or sad. Truth to me is very important.
And then certainly for your kids and your grandkids, everybody coming after, you have an obligation. Your ethics really should be, even if you don't want to face something, we really need to, because we have a lot of calamities on the horizon if we don't try to address them. Okay. And then the last thing I'll say is in May 1st, Lawrence Krauss is going to join us via Skype. So
he's always fun also.
And then we also have Larry Mendoza, one of the hosts for this show, is doing a Darwin Day talk this Sunday. If you check out our Road to Reason website, it's on evolution and the evolution of creationism. So he's going to be up in Northern Virginia giving a talk.
And he's really good at that too. It's very interesting.
All right, on to
the news, because we're running. I want to spend more time with Phil as much as possible. In the news, we have in Puerto Rico. Yes, Puerto Rico is part of the United States, so know that. And in Puerto Rico, the Humanistas Seculares de Puerto Rico, the Puerto Rican humanist, secular humanist, they sued the San Juan Police Department a couple of days ago. And the reason they did it is because they break the separation of church and state in such a blatant way that they will stop people in the highway with flashing lights. The police will stop you and will pull you out of the car and pray and have you pray on top of it. They put their hands on you to pray. So that kind of stuff, it's intolerable. If you look at the letterhead for the chief of police department, there has Jesus and all kinds of religious things in there. They have all kinds of events that are paid for religion that are paid by the police department. And so it goes from the top, bottom, and it takes a lot of courage for them to do this, because who knows what's going to happen now. Maybe their parking tickets will get lost. Maybe, they'll get stopped more often for speeding or whatever. They have to be a little bit afraid that there might be some pushback, because again, that comes from the top down. It's the entire police department in San Juan. And that's what happens when you don't stop religion from creeping into government.
And that's one of the reasons it's so critical here in the United States. I get some flack from family and friends about being open atheist activists, but the reality is we're so safe compared to lots of other places, and if we don't speak up now, our kids and our grandkids are going to be in so much more trouble, because we have a lot of people that would like to shift America into a theocracy.
And it grows to become normal, so we don't want that to be normal.
Right. Right, we need the Michelle Bachmans to look like, holy cow, did she really just say that, instead of Rick Perry and Sarah Palin and George Bush, and suddenly when you have one wing of our party is God's own party, we're in a lot of trouble, and we need to wake up and try to do something about this right now. So Absolutely. Any politicians want to come to Reason Rally, where you embrace reason, that should not be a shameful thing to do.
We'll be more than happy to have them.
All right.
Next news you have?
So we were originally going to have this show a couple of weeks ago, and we got snowed out. Phil speculated God was trying to stop him from making his appearance. I think that's possible. One of the things that was in the news then was the Planned Parenthood bogus video that was going around. I think it's still worth talking about. We'll kind of do it quickly here, but that video was debunked almost immediately as that was coming out.
Yes.
It didn't stop politicians from jumping on it and saying, hey, what can we do? Let's defund Planned Parenthood. Again, it has real consequences when religion guides somebody's thinking and when it guides their politics. We all pay for it. I think it was very interesting that the people that put this forward, they work for a completely bogus front group, which is just for...
Well, they're being taken to court now.
Well, right. And so Planned Parenthood, is off the hook. And these people that made the video are both been indicted. One of them may face 20 years in jail. You can always see the spin coming, how now the legal system, I guess, is out to get them more Christian persecution. But we should be looking at Christian terrorism. The person that was that went and shot up a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado specifically referenced this video, and no more baby body parts are going to be
Think of the thousands and thousands of dollars that have been spent on this investigation where there's nothing. And even after it's been realized that there's nothing, there's still politicians here today saying that, well, that just because Texas exonerated them doesn't mean we're not going to continue to go after them.
Right, and there's whole propaganda mills that want to keep this afloat, that Planned Parenthood must be doing something wrong. This is just the medical research that will help protect people in the future. They're not out there chopping up babies and selling parts to make money.
Yeah. All right. So that brings us to the...
We got a person of the day.
Person of the week.
Secular person of the week.
Person of the week. This person is someone that has been very inspirational to me personally. Someone that is I consider a friend, and is someone that has worked relentlessly for several years to make sure that you, the viewer, sees the reality of the world in many aspects.
I was going to go a totally different route. I was going to say we were scraping the bottom of the barrel. We didn't know what to do. No, but we want to thank Paul Sheehan, our producer.
Paul Sheehan. He is our person of the week.
This is the one that pulled the show together in the very beginning. I've mentioned
and
that.
Still pulls it together today.
That's right. And if you got anybody out in the Fairfax area wants to help get involved with this, help staff it, learn some technical equipment, there's a beautiful facility here at Fairfax Public
Modern
Access.
and really good. I'm telling you, he's a really cool guy, and I don't care what anybody else says. He's okay in my book.
So now we're going to move on to the joke of the week, as if that wasn't the joke of the week. We're going to talk about briefly the NFL. There will be over 100 million people today dedicating 3 or 4 or 6 hours within parties and stuff to watching this really, really important game. You could argue there's better ways that you should spend your time. Anyway, there's also going to be a lot of people praying for their team to win and genuinely thinking that their prayers are going to be answered.
Well, and you have in the past we've heard of football players like Tim Tebow, and we've had Arian Foster, sort of the opposite side of that coin. But bottom line is that God is going to pick a side.
Right, and officially, if he wants to prove himself with a miracle, let the Cowboys win this year. If the Cowboys come out of this game with a victory, that's a miracle.
We'll believe.
Otherwise, it's 50-50 shot.
We'll believe in that.
What's our secondary joke of the day, and then we'll go on.
All right, the secondary and final, before we go into the break, is... So there's a priest and a rabbi sitting in a park, and the little boy, a 12-year-old boy, walks by, and the priest looks at the rabbi and says, hey, would you like to screw that kid? And the rabbi looks at him puzzled and says, screw him out of what?
That's an excellent impression there. We're going to go to public service announcements. Be right back with Phil Torres.
Good.
Homemade noodles. Marty, stop it. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. It reminds me, I've been thinking maybe we should try a new form of birth control. I heard about this one, it's called the IUD, intrauterine device. Or we could try the patch on your arm. Actually, I think that one goes on your butt.
Bedsider.org has birth control information and a lot more. And it's...
What do you think, though? Arm or the butt?
There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
This is Richard Dawkins. Doing commercials is unfamiliar territory for me, but I'm inviting you to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, on Fairfax Public Access every Sunday. Each week, the hosts tackle wishful thinking, religion, pseudoscience, and the harm they cause, with a combination of facts, humor, and community involvement. They challenge believers to defend their faith and give you, the skeptic, a voice. With live call-ins for viewers and streaming on the World Wide Web, there's never a dull moment. Don't wait. Look at them now on Facebook and YouTube, and remember to watch Road to Reason, a skeptic's guide to the 21st century, or there'll be hell to pay.
Body language can tell you all sorts of things. Like someone is having a stroke. Know the sudden signs. Learn fast. Face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty. Time to call 911 and get them to a hospital immediately. Learn the body language and spot a stroke fast.
A critical thinker is in a frame of mind of always questioning everything. including things they don't necessarily want to question. You may have done some research and satisfied yourself on a position you're sure is right. Good. Now, after a month or two of that, go look at some research that opposes your point of view or challenges the position you've taken. You can even look into it with the idea of poking holes in their arguments if you want, but it would be better to just have an open mind and read it as though you'd never heard or seen anything on the issue before. You may be very surprised what you learn, and if you're doing this right, you will be. Always be open to opposing points of view and counter arguments. That's what critical thinking is all about. And now you know.
All right, thank you to Chris Shelton for that. We're back on Road to Reason, A Skeptic's Guide to the 21st Century. We're now joined by Phil Torres here. Phil is an author, musician, a philosopher, and a neuroscientist. He's also an affiliate scholar at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies. His first book out was A Crisis of Faith, Atheism, Emerging Technologies, and the Future of Humanity. Due out on February 16th, just a few days from now, is The End, What Science and Religion Have to Tell Us About the Apocalypse. Phil, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great.
Well, you know, this book is, I highly recommend it. It's not out yet. So just for the record, the book is coming out next week. So if you want to get it today, you probably can just do pre-orders maybe. But anyway, I highly recommend that you read it, steal it, do whatever it takes, because it's really fun read, even though we'll talk about the tone of the book. So before we get into the topics, and there's a lot of stuff to cover in here, what made you write this book? Why did you write this book?
Because, if you look historically, our species has been around for 200,000 years. The human, the genus, which is Homo, we're Homo sapiens, has been around for about 2 million years. And for just about that entire time, there was a small number of risks which originated from nature that sort of haunted our species, our ancestors going way back. So as of 1945, though, this changed, and the end of World War II simultaneously introduced the beginning of the atomic age, and that sort of marked the first time, in human history when self-annihilation became a possibility. So suddenly you had a growing number of scholars and the public as well talking about the possibility of extinction, some sort of global catastrophic event as a result of a nuclear exchange and firestorms and so on. So that all by itself is quite a watershed moment in terms of human history. But even since then, there has been a rapid proliferation of the number of existential risk scenarios, not just from deriving from nuclear weapons, but from climate change is one, biodiversity loss is another one, and then various technologies that sort of loom at the moment sort of hauntingly on the threat horizon before us, from biotechnology, nanotechnology.
So from 1945 was one thing, now it's a growing number of things.
Yeah, so 1945 sort of marked the first time there was an anthropogenic existential catastrophe scenario. Before that, it was all from nature, it was supervolcanoes and asteroids and comets and so on. So unfortunately, though, so we essentially increased the number of ways that our species could, our lineage could sort of break off. Since then, there's been even more scenarios, more dangers that sort of lurk in our future. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, I feel like every generation has sort of shouted that the end is near.
Mostly religious people.
In the past, yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, going all the way back to the recorded history, several millennia before Christ was born, and so everybody. So there's sort of this millenarian tendency that humans have, but the difference is that these days there is the claims being made about a possible annihilation scenarios in the future are based on science, They are derived through robust logical reasoning. So there's a qualitative difference, as I emphasize in the book, the difference between the more secular branch of eschatology and the religious eschatology is entirely epistemological. It has to do with the status of these claims as prognostications based on checkable, verifiable evidence.
Right, I think it's incredibly important to drive that point home that there's always been threats. Now they're actually real. There really is a difference in critical thinking and scientific thinking and rigorous logic as verified, by empiric studies in the world.
Yeah.
Versus my book says this, or I heard it somewhere else that you can't see, but I really honestly heard it.
Yeah.
So this is the scientist, and you point out, which is very interesting, who are the most pessimistic people these days? You're right. I mean, is it the people that don't know much, or the people that have really studied this that say, you know what, we really do face significant threats? Yeah,
there's a line that I allude to, and also, as it happens, a prior book is well written by Sir Martin Rees, who has founded the Cambridge Center for the Study of Existential Risk. So he's also sort of a major player in this burgeoning new field. But there's a line from the Einstein-Russell Manifesto, which was written in opposition of nuclear proliferation, and they essentially say that they found in their experience that the individuals who know the most about the risk are the most gloomy. So in my experience, also sort of perusing this rapidly growing literature on big picture hazards before us, I've kind of found the exact same thing. I mean, there are a lot of quite level-headed individuals who are aware of cognitive biases and who explicitly do not want to participate in doom-mongering or anything like that, who nonetheless have come to rather dismal conclusions about the future prospects of our species.
Right. And we're going to dive into the specifics a little bit. Okay. First, can you go through and just give us an overview? You listed a number of
how many things can you list off the top of your head that can kill us?
No, and then also put them into a useful category so people can start to break down what are the existential risks.
Yeah. So I think.
He didn't think we were going to quiz him today.
No, I have no objection. I think a lot of the scholars in this field, but not all, many of them think that superintelligence is perhaps the greatest long-term threat to our future.
We've had a couple of important people talk about that.
Yeah, just recently, Elon Musk and Bill Gates have both tweeted about a book called Superintelligence, written by Nick Bostrom, who's an Oxford philosopher.
It's a great book.
Yeah, it's quite a fascinating book. He also founded the Future of Humanity Institute.
Stephen Hawking, I think, also mentioned something about.
Exactly. Yeah. Hawking has mentioned that if it's not the best thing to ever happen to humanity, it's almost certainly going to be the worst.
I know I'm trying to give the categories, but I sort of want to jump on this while it's there.
Yeah, sure.
Why is it also the best thing? Because you talk about unknown unknowns, and that is superintelligence our only way to get some more of those known?
Yes. So that the unknown unknowns, there's quite a bit to say about those. But certainly one of the potential. This is a bit more theoretical. There are more concrete things to say, I think, about it. But certainly there could be dangers sort of hidden in the universe that are cognitively invisible to us, in principle, simply due to the particular structure and architecture of our brains, in exactly the way that a dog, given its particular nervous system, is simply never going to comprehend a quark or a lepton or a boson or something like that. So there could the example I use in the book is a dog sort of wandering the streets of Hiroshima or Nagasaki not only didn't anticipate it being vaporized in August of 1945, but could not have in principle. So perhaps we're a part of the animal kingdom. The difference between us and dogs is not one of kind, as religion would have you believe. It's one of degree. There's a continuous evolution between all of the branches of the tree of life. So it follows that there could be by analogy, risks out in the universe that we don't.
Just beyond our comprehension.
No matter how hard you think, even if imagine God existed for a moment and he climbed down out of the heavens and he tried to explain it with perfect lucidity, we still would not be able to grasp it. So exactly.
And those threats could be, they're not just threats that could arise from superintelligence. There may be natural threats that we just can't grasp the same way we're limited to sort of 4 dimensions of.
Exactly, and that's where a qualitatively different kind of superintelligent mind could enters the picture.
Can you describe what that is, qualitative versus quantitative?
Sure.
And maybe go back and also hit unknown known. Explain what you're talking about with known knowns, unknown.
Sure.
And people may not know what a superintelligence is.
Yeah. So okay. So
I can go the rabbit hole.
So there are kind of 2 different non-mutually exclusive versions of superintelligence. A quantitative one is a mind whose underlying substrate is hardware rather than the wetware of the nervous system. And it has essentially the same capacities as the human brain, except that the speed at which it can think is much faster, and or alternatively, the amount of information that it can store is vastly greater than what humans can, in principle, achieve. So that's a quantitative. It's again a difference in degree. It's more of what we have to a significant extent, and a qualitative one, by analogy, it's more what you find between a dog and human, or a chipmunk and a dog, or something like that. So the library of concepts that are available to it, the concept of an atom. It's one that we created at some point in an effort to describe something that was presumably we believed was real in the mind-independent world. So we create this, but the fact is that we were able to create that concept in the first place.
A mosquito can never make that model or go through a modeling process like that. Well, what about, can you go into just the categories of known knowns, and maybe you can hit some of the main ones in each of those categories as you do it?
Yeah.
So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt there. Before we get to that,
sure.
What do you expect, because before we walk away, what do you expect out of people reading this book? What are the goals? What are you trying to achieve with this besides informing people? Do you want people to pressure their politicians? Do you want people to commit suicide in mass? What are some, lose hope?
Yeah, so not so much the mass suicide option.
Okay, not today, all right.
Frankly, it's not even an option that I considered much.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think so. So the fact is that we're sort of in a qualitatively different world today, and that's not mere. I mean, there's some genuine scientific basis to this claim. There's sort of this new epoch of anthropogenic apocalypses. So I think the first step is to promulgate this, the certain facts about our this new plight that we find ourselves in. And I feel like, especially moving forward, because a lot of the biggest risks are ones that derive from future anticipated technologies, like biotechnology, synthetic biology. CRISPR has been in the news a lot recently, a gene editing technology, which is supposed to be quite revolutionary, and will probably win someone the Nobel Prize. So I think, sort of moving forward, it's by definition, existential risks are ones that can only happen once in a species' history. So it's unlike any other kind of threat that we've ever encountered before. There is no learning from, unlike the risk of you're in the savannah and you're being chased by a lion.
But there's no evolutionary selection for the survivors. It's just we're all wiped out.
Yeah, and in fact, along these lines, our cognitive hardware was evolved by natural selection in the savannah for 2 million years, and what mattered to the sort of environmental filter was selecting for individuals who, the ability to think a week or a month or let's say a century out, or in terms of not just your local, provincial sort of situation, but to think about the situation of humanity as a whole on this little planetary spaceship, was just not selected for. So it's in a way, neither was doing calculus, but that's partly why a lot of people have difficulty doing calculus. So we're trying to, on the other hand, these problems are perhaps the most difficult to think clearly about, because they're so big. It only happens once, unlike every other kind of risk. So you have to be proactive and not reactive.
You've written a book. We are able to conceptualize a bunch of them.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of them do have things we could at least mitigate the risk, maybe not eliminate it, but cut down. How much do you think teaching critical thinking to little kids instead of indoctrinating, how much help would that be? And we'll talk about religious eschatology separately.
Yeah,
but just in general, our media is not very scientifically literate.
Yeah.
They present two sides without seeming to know which one is more scientifically supported.
Yeah. So
how much would critical thinking help? Why don't you start with that?
I think it's impossible to underemphasize the importance of critical thinking. It's essentially, one thing I talk about in the book, and that a transhumanist talk a lot about is changing modifying the nervous system through cognitive enhancements in order to change the brain. But we can keep the same hardware and get better software, and that's what critical thinking is. These are tools for thinking. They have they have a sort of meta a status. And they can be applied to every single. Every aspect of our mental lives is based on some sort of theory of epistemology, and critical thinking is nothing more than epistemology put into practice. So I think it's. I sort of mention, although I don't go into great detail in the book, but I do mention that. I think one of the most important things that we could be doing, particularly the secular community, is lobbying to ameliorate the educational system. For primary, secondary, and I've thought like a basic epistemology class in college or high school or something.
In philosophy, people used to see philosophy classes, and now, unless you're in college, particularly taking that, there's no access to it. So you learn to think in philosophy classes.
I always felt like the greatest thing that philosophy gave me was a sense of what it means to think clearly about things. And not that I'm any kind of paragon of that, but at least I feel much more aware of succumbing to biases or making an argument based on fallacy. And you just can't expect to navigate the wilderness of risks before us if you don't have beliefs that are hinged to reality.
Right.
And the best way to hinge beliefs to reality is through logic and evidence, and all of that is what falls under the purview of epistemology. Understanding the relations.
And critical thinking is really its own separate tool set that you have to learn. It's not natural, it's not intuitive, so we need to put it in our school systems if we think it's important for our futures.
Absolutely. So I gotta admit, this is the scariest book I've read in a long time, on many levels. It's like watching Fox News, but with evidence. Okay, and in a sense, it covers a lot of material, a lot of different kinds of risks, and a lot of different things that are in a language that is fairly clear for the average person. You're not writing to a scientific community, so you're writing to the average person. Mm-hmm. The question that I expect some people to ask is, well, Phil, what qualifies you to talk about this and give an opinion about this? How would you respond to that?
Well, I think, so my personal background is, I've been an affiliate scholar at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technologies for many years.
What do they do?
So that's an institute that was founded by Nick Bostrom as well. And they're sort of on the vanguard of sort of futurological research, and then discussing, exploring the ethical implications of designer babies, of various things,
technologies,
various things that sound quite science fiction-y, but are genuinely visible on the horizon of technological possibility. So yeah, so I mean, I have a history of published, in journals about this before, but I also would add that I don't feel like a degree per se it holds much weight necessarily.
It's not like college degrees are being issued and the risk of destroying the world.
Yeah, and I think
Sam Harris made a very similar point that he no longer, I don't know if he ever was, but he certainly is not that concerned with somebody's title if the arguments stand on their own. And just reading your book, your arguments, you don't need...
I heard the same thing,
Like you can read them, they're very clear, you understand them, and you can go into denialism if you don't want to believe them, but you put it out there.
And that's the beauty of this book, because you're not relying on, hey, I'm Phil and I know what I'm talking about. No, it's just anyone can go and check any of the things you're saying in here and verify that indeed these are the issues that are coming up, these are the things, and you give also a lot of references throughout the book. I mean, just lots of places where people can actually go and expand on that information. So, which again, if you're a critical thinker, you would want to go and follow on those things.
Earlier, just several minutes ago, I mentioned that the fundamental philosophical difference between the sort of secular branch of eschatology and the religious one is epistemology, and that is all about checkability. Intersubjective verifiability. So citations are a part of that. So the other thing I was going to add is independent of. There's something called the genetic fallacy, which is essentially what Sam Harris was getting at. That it doesn't matter where a claim comes from. It could come from a religious person. It could, but what matters is how the status of the claim itself relative to the pool of available evidence. So I do take pains to not make any sort of futurological assertions that go beyond the evidence or don't have a proper citation. Perhaps there are a few instances where I theorize a bit, but I attempt to be quite transparent about
I think you mentioned when you're being speculative in there, if I remember correctly.
So you mentioned that difference with the religious and the secular. So maybe this is a good time to start talking a little bit about that. And how are they different? How is the eschatological, I can't say that, religious and secular different?
There are a number of critical differences. So epistemology we've sort of already established. I take that to be the fundamental, and then there are sort of more superficial differences like.
And by epistemology, you just mean how we know what we know.
Study of the end of the world. Exactly. So that's just a branch has been a branch of theology for the longest time. Really, it's perhaps. Many theologians have argued. It's the essence of religion, because eschatology is ultimately what provides the hope for the future. At some point, this weary world,
afterlife.
And humanity will rejoin a God in this paradisaical sort of.
So epistemology is just the study of how we know. Eschatology is going to be about how it's all going to end.
Exactly. So there's epistemology, which has to do with knowledge, and then eschatology, which is the study of the end of the world. They're very similar terms. So very easy to confuse. So thank you for asking for clarification. So in terms of like religious views about the end of the world, they're supposed to happen, and with respect to existential risks, which are these basically worst case scenarios for humanity. Those are obviously things that we, particularly people who are secularists, don't want to happen because it entails the extermination of humanity. Another difference is.
Does religion pose a threat to me as an atheist? Like, talk about the melding of politics and religion, and what we're really faced with. I think your book gives such power to the idea that atheists need to come out and be open because. This is our crisis too.
And even religious people need to come out because how different religions. So and in there explain also how is it that religion can destroy us?
So the idea is that, and this gets back to your question about the categories. So you have things like biodiversity loss and climate change, and these are sort of larger contextual issues that there's a small chance that either could result in some sort of secular apocalyptic event. a runaway greenhouse effect, for example, or a catastrophic shift of the global ecosystem or something like that. I mean, these are things that reputable scientists have published in some of the most prestigious journals in the world about. But I take it that those, the more likely outcome with those is that they will modulate the probability of all sorts of other risks. So when you live in a world full of environmental degradation, nuclear war might be more probable. There's already been a scientific study that has connected anthropogenic climate change with the rise of ISIS, because it increased the probability of this record-breaking drought in Syria, which led to this mass influx into urban centers of farmers due to crop failure, and that's what fomented the Syrian civil war. And the Syrian civil war, of course, gave rise to the Islamic State.
And that's not a crackpot theory. I think that's very likely what happened, and very likely what's going to keep happening as we get scarcer and scarcer resources in desperate areas.
And so scientists have talked about that. It's quite a robust claim. Department of Defense has affirmed this connection. John Brenner, the CIA director, has talked about this. So in addition, so you have this sort of larger predicament, which is which is environmental in nature and perhaps will conduce to more conflicts in the future. And then in addition, you have all of these technologies, in particular biotechnology, synthetic biology, nanotechnology, robotics, that are becoming exponentially more powerful. They're enabling us to manipulate and rearrange the physical world in extraordinary ways. And so this development is arguably exponential, maybe exponentially exponential. At the same time, these fields as well are empowering smaller and smaller groups. So you have, at the extreme, you could have single individuals, a lone psychopath, an apocalyptic movement like the Islamic State, or if you look back through history, there are many, many examples of apocalyptic groups that felt like they had to destroy the world in order to save it, and if only they had the means, we probably wouldn't be here today. So looking forward to the future, now you have these technologies which are putting extraordinary, unprecedented power in the hands of single individuals. The question is then, why would somebody want to destroy the world? I mean, there are nationalist, terrorists, anarchists, Marxists throughout the 19th and 20th century. There are states as well. Even North Korea, it's a bit of a circus show there. But states and nationalist groups, Marxist movements, and so on, oftentimes are motivated in part, or their motivation is constrained by self-preservation.
Yeah, I was going to say, but to be clear, no one's claiming that North Korea is trying to destroy the world.
Exactly. Yeah. So the question is, once these tools become available, which there's quite a good case to make that they will. We already have nuclear weapons. Biotechnology is on the horizon, and so on. So why would somebody want to employ them for some catastrophic? Why would a terrorist do that? A lot of terrorists are into self-preservation, but there is a small percentage, fluctuating percentage throughout history of people who have wanted to destroy the world, and they're oftentimes motivated by religion. Right. There are contemporary examples. I mean, the Islamic State is perhaps the most. There's a scholar named Richard Landes who uses the term active cataclysmic, for this sort of attitude. So moving forward, I mean, you're having.
But what about dominionists in the United States? I mean, is that Sam Harris had made a comment years ago about if a mushroom cloud appears, there's going to be a bunch of people that see a silver lining in it, and he was talking about how.
And Bill Maher in Religulous has made the same claim at the end that it's these Christians that may want to see the end of the world.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I don't think we should. I do think there's kind of an unfortunate tendency to focus on the Islamic world. Well, I admit there are unique and profound problems that are causally related to religious ideology. There's also, there's a significant movement here in the U.S. ever since the 1970, when Hal Lindsey published The Late Great Planet Earth, and he really popularized the dispensationalist view, which many people subscribe to, and this is what's associated with the rapture. So anytime you hear the rapture, you could think of dispensation. Yeah, and the whole idea is that. The Israeli, the founding of the Israeli state in 1948 was the most significant eschatological event since the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. And it indicates, they take it as empirical confirmation that their narrative is true. And this is where Armageddon will be fought. And there's a pastor I talk about a bit in the book named John Hagee, who has fostered close ties with a shocking number of Republican candidates, including some running for president.
So when you have, we talked about other stuff that can be prevented or tackled, education.
Yeah.
Maybe some things you can calculate probabilities like asteroids and volcanoes and things like that.
Yeah.
How do you deal with religion? How do you deal with someone like ISIS or the Christians or any of these groups? How do we mitigate that risk?
That, I think, is the central conundrum. And I'm not sure
you knew everything.
Well, I must have two different answers. Like, here in the U.S., we're supposed to have separation of church and state. We'd be at a lot lower risk if it wasn't the people wielding state power that believed in dispensationalism.
Yeah.
And we fairly often want that separation of church not to exist.
Right. So I guess one way is to try to straighten that. Then in Islam, where the concept of separation of church and state really doesn't have such a good theological basis, or not theological.
Well, in education, I think in
here
part
we're
also,
not theologically grounded. Over there, they don't have that separation.
Yeah.
I mean, I always think of Maslow's pyramid, where, look, if people had, like in Syria, they had enough water, enough to eat, enough to, that those hierarchies, finally they get to think about these kinds of things, because we can't expect somebody in Syria who's starving, waiting to, knowing that if they're not going to live to see tomorrow, to think about any of these things and to think, that it's easier for religion to walk in and offer this beautiful solution of heaven, and let's destroy everything because, you'll go to heaven.
Yeah. Even along those lines, I mean, there's not only is it contemplating a big picture hazards requires a certain sort of leisure and luxury, which is what you're getting at. You have to satisfy the sort of bottom levels. But even more so, I mean, I argue in a forthcoming Skeptic article that some certain conditions, such as climate change, will probably increase the likelihood of apocalyptic movements arising in the first place. Because not only, I mean, part of the way to make sense of your inability to satisfy those lower levels, foods, all the maintenance needs of life, is to look at your predicament through an apocalyptic lens. There's tremendous hope. I mean, what's more powerful than the thoughts?
It's written in there. It's coming. Let's be happy about it.
And there will be relief. And at the end, all the evil people in the world will be banished to hell. We'll be in paradise forever with God. And I mean, you could expect, due to climate change and various other things that I discussed, perhaps an increase in the size and frequency of precisely the sort of groups that will be empowered to wreak unprecedented havoc on civilization.
I think it's funny that you mentioned, like Israel, that they took that as the definitive proof. Just what the greatness of confirmation bias and cherry picking, how for 2,000 years they get everything wrong, and they have one thing that wasn't exactly predicted, but that's close enough, and now that's the proof.
The greatest irony is most New Testament scholars in Europe and North America believe that Jesus himself was an apocalyptic prophet whose prophetic claims about the future failed.
Right.
So the great irony is it's not merely that we've waited 2 millennia. It's that Jesus says this generation will not pass away. So
we talked about critical thinking. Is that going to help protect us? What about, do we need to form like a global humanist-based society? Would that give us at least the wherewithal to look at these? Can we address this as scattered nations that are competing against each other, or do we need a global society that takes rationale?
So people hear UN taking over.
Yeah. No, what do you think?
One world order.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people have talked about the one, a global government. It sounds scary. It's associated with certain. Quite irrational apocalyptic beliefs among some Christians, but it does seem it is a puzzle moving forward. How it is that when you have for example, when part of the social contract, right, is you give up certain the state provides protection for you in exchange for certain powers. When you have a population that is individually empowered by things like nanotechnology or biotechnology, synthetic biology, which is all becoming, there are biohackers right now who have set up labs and can manipulate genes. And all sorts of processes are automated. You can hit a button, and then extremely complicated stuff that only the brightest and most skilled scientists, 20 years were able to do. Just it can be done by
automation. Yeah.
So when you have this situation. What happens to society? It seems like the social contract itself might dissolve to some extent, or at least be compromised, perhaps significantly. So I think it's a genuine puzzle moving forward. Do we need a global government, like a single surveillance system that is, sort of hits some sort of reasonable balance between invasion of privacy and also protection, because those aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. I'm not sure. It is.
Say, I have a solution. You tell me what you think.
Yeah.
I think that some of the bigger countries, especially the ones that have things in space, like now India and China, but that they all get together and collude to come up with a story that they're aliens. That they found an alien signal, and that itself now becomes now it's all humans as us against them.
Yeah.
And I think that will help us unite ourselves more.
Yeah.
Even though hopefully it's, maybe it's just fake,
yeah.
But the idea is that, hey, now all humans are seeing each other. Hey, you're from India, but you're my brother.
Yeah,
let's worry about
There's
that.
There's a greater threat. Yeah, I perhaps that is might be difficult to orchestrate in terms of details.
In today's day and age.
But there's I feel like you're gesturing at some real sort of psychological tendency of people to come together when there's a greater threat than each other.
Well, I saw with my siblings as I was growing up, and we would having fights, and when our parents showed up and we were all going to get punished or whatever, then we all forgive and forget.
So given that we can't evolve our psychology and cognitive apparatus very quickly, what do you think the culpability of places like the Koch brothers and think tanks and all these places that just pump out propaganda that are leading us toward oblivion? Do we take legal action? Like, what do we do? Like, if we can't get back to an unbiased media, are we hosed? Because people will, with confirmation bias, you can always find a denialist who's exactly on your page right now.
Yeah.
Is the media a big problem? Is that an avenue to fix things?
Yes, I think so. So just might have been last week or 2 weeks ago, the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists announced that the doomsday clock, which represents our sort of collective proximity to some sort of global catastrophe,
human annihilation.
Human annihilation,
yeah. Okay.
So midnight represents doom in the clock. And in last year they moved it from 5 to 3 minutes, and this year they said that they were going to keep it there, due to North Korea, due to various terrorist organizations, most significant being Al Qaeda in the long run. The Islamic State is much less likely to have long-term effects. Anyways, there's a multiplicity of different factors that
and due to our political ineptitude, I think was one of the ones that they mentioned. That
well, see, this is exactly the thing. So if you read their announcement, they say the two bright spots in a, as they put it, in a darker world situation was the Paris Climate Agreement between 195
which is not enforceable.
Which is not even. I mean, they say they're not as bright as they
were bright-ish spots.
Their brightest spots is perhaps a better
sea of darkness.
locution. Yeah, and then the Iran nuclear deal. These are the reasons that the highly venerable, extremely educated people on the Science and Security Board of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, these are the reasons they see optimism for the future. They're also precisely the two things that the conservative, religious conservatives in the U.S. most vociferously opposed. So I do, apocalyptic rhetoric is not uncommon to find in political discourse. Everybody says, the other is going to ruin the country if they're elected. But I think there is actually a fairly good argument to make that that the Republicans are inching us civilization closer towards, the eternal grave of extinction through climate change.
Yeah, the question is always: are they doing it on purpose, or are they doing it just to be contrarians, or are they doing it just because they're ignorant?
I think it's probably ideology. I mean, climate regulations will hurt the economy.
The problem is that I see a lot of the ideology in politics to come from corporations that are trying to take care of themselves today and this quarter rather than the future. They don't care about the future; they care about this quarter.
We have an election system where you're focused myopically on just the next election. We have an economic system, capitalism, which is all about short term. I mean, there isn't long term planning. How are our grandkids going to make out on an Earth that's succumbed to climate change, mega droughts, and desertification, and so on.
Brenda, the environment is one great big externality that just doesn't count, and it's for the most important thing in a sense.
Yeah, so there is a kind of institutional momentum away from more thoughtful, careful analyses of what current policies are. We're entering this new era. What strategies do we have? It's hard to get people to think about this. Part of that big
problem with politicians is that they've come to tell their folks, the people that follow them, that scientific opinion is the same thing as layman's opinion. Yeah. And that someone that is a plumber has the same value in giving giving an opinion on making bridges as someone that builds bridges for a living. Yeah. And so that's a problem. One thing we haven't mentioned, I want to mention before we go. We talked about this purposely destruction of the world, but there is also, you mentioned in your book, quite a lot of ways that we accidentally can do ourselves in.
Yes, yeah.
So no one's fault is just accident. Right. An accident.
Right. Well, no intent, right? You talk terror versus error.
Terror versus error, exactly.
That's what I wanted to say, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's an extraordinary history, which I document to some extent, of accidents that nearly resulted in nuclear wars. I mean, far more than most people realize. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and right down the road there is a town called Goldsboro, and two bombs were dropped in the 60s as a result of the Chrome Dome project. And one of the nuclear weapons was never recovered. It's still there. It's still under the farmland. But many more examples with germs, and so on and so on. So it's quite possible that even if we have a perfectly morally rational world in the future, there could just be a stupid mistake or a momentary lapse of judgment that results in some kind of catastrophe.
So we only have just about a minute left. Can you touch on the loss of biodiversity? Jerry Coyne had a nice paper on this several years ago. If you can just touch on the global warming isn't the only threat. There are some other things that play into it. And how are species faring? And what do most species end up doing over history?
Yeah, so I mean, 99.9% of species have gone extinct. But the rate at which, there's a background rate of extinction. These days, ever since really the Industrial Revolution, it's been perhaps up to 10,000 times. This is what people can look around. This is what an extinction event looks like. There have been 5 big ones throughout history. This is the 6th one. It's called the Holocene extinction event. And there's a recent paper in Science Advances that has confirmed that even on the most optimistic assumptions, we're in the midst of a huge die-out that mirrors what was seen 65 million years ago with the dinosaurs. It's difficult for people to understand, but this is it's a huge issue, and if it continues for the next 2 centuries, there could be genuinely significant, profound, catastrophic consequences.
Well, and there's unintended consequences that it has, like bees going extinct, for instance, would affect.
That's absolutely part of it. Yeah.
All right, well...
and I'm sorry, Hopi Hoekstra was the co-author of that. I blanked on it, but wanted to put her name in there.
All right, well, I think that this is all we'll have time for today. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed it. We could talk about this for the entire day. I insist that we need to have some wine for these kinds of discussions.
Remember, April 17th, he'll be in Richmond, and check it out, The End on Amazon. So thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you so much.
It was a lot of fun. We need to do this again, probably with other subjects. So thank you.
Yeah, time definitely went pretty fast.